Imagine you are swimming in the open ocean, just, maybe you're off the coast of Florida or cruising a reef somewhere in Hawaii. You look down, and drifting right alongside you is this massive sea turtle.
Yeah, just completely calm, gliding through the water.
Exactly. It's majestic, clearly ancient, and you just look at it and have this immediate question pop into your head, like, how old are you? Have you been swimming in these waters since the Cold War? Or are you just a really, really big teenager?
Right, and the kicker there is you have absolutely no way of knowing just by looking at the animal.
Which is wild to me.
It's actually one of the classic problems in marine biology. You really cannot age a sea turtle visually. I mean, they don't go gray, they don't get wrinkles, they obviously don't carry any sort of identification. Externally, a sea turtle is essentially timeless.
And this is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. If you look inside, if you look at their bones and the actual engineering of their shells,
Yeah.
there is a whole biography written right there.
A biography written entirely in calcium and collagen. Today, we are going to explore exactly how scientists physically extract time from a flipper bone, and then we're going to look at the shell itself as this incredible piece of high-performance engineering.
Right. So just to give you an overview of our mission today and the sources we are using, we have two very distinct documents. First, we are walking through a fascinating, slightly gruesome, and I have to say surprisingly dangerous laboratory protocol from NOAA. That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
The official title is the Protocol for Processing Sea Turtle Bones for Age Estimation.
Yes. And to balance out that lab manual, we also have a brand new 2025 study from the Journal of Experimental Biology, which analyzes the turtle's carapace, the shell, as a mechanical structure.
So we are essentially moving from the microscopic, hidden timeline inside the bone all the way out to the structural armor that protects the animal out in the deep sea.
And I have to admit, reading through this NOAA protocol, the actual science of determining age is a lot messier and frankly scarier than I ever expected. We are talking slow cookers, diamond saws, and some chemical reactions that literally made me physically recoil while reading.
Oh yeah, it is definitely not just white coats and clipboards. Histology, which is the study of microscopic anatomy, it is a very hands-on process. It involves a massive amount of physical processing just to get to the raw data.
So let's start with the core concept here. The sources use a very specific term for this aging method: skeletochronology.
It's a mouthful, for sure, but if you break it down, it makes perfect sense. Skeleton, chrono, meaning time, and etymology, the study of. So the study of time within the skeleton. If you understand how tree rings work, you basically understand skeletochronology.
I like dendrochronology.
Exactly like that. Trees, as you know, grow in cycles based on the seasons. So in the spring and summer, resources are abundant, sunlight is plentiful, so they grow fast. But in the winter, that growth slows down or stops completely. That difference in the speed of growth creates a visible ring in the wood.
And sea turtles are reptiles, right? So their metabolism is inextricably linked to their environment.
Right, they're ectothermic. So when the ocean water is warm and food is everywhere, their metabolism is high, and they are growing like crazy.
They're just depositing a lot of bone during those months.
Exactly. But when winter hits, or say they migrate through a really barren, cold patch of ocean, their core temperature drops, their metabolism plummets, growth just stalls out. And that stalling leaves a very specific permanent mark in the bone structure. The NOAA protocol refers to them as lags, L-A-G. Lines of arrested growth.
Lines of arrested growth. Okay, so by counting these dark lines, we can just estimate the turtle's age, just like counting the rings on a freshly cut tree stump.
Well, in theory, yes. But biology is rarely ever that simple. The protocol spends a lot of time highlighting a major biological hurdle called resorption.
And this is where the bone essentially eats itself, right?
Correct. Bone isn't dead stone, it is active, living tissue. So as bone grows wider over the years, the turtle's body often dissolves the inner layers to make the marrow cavity larger. It's recycling that calcium for other uses.
So the turtle is effectively erasing the first few chapters of its own diary.
That's a great way to put it. If you grab just any random bone from a turtle skeleton, you might find that the first 5 or 10 years of rings are just completely gone, eaten away. That is why the NOAA protocol is so obsessive about which exact bone you have to use. You cannot just use a rib or a piece of the femur.
They specify the humerus, the upper bone of the front flipper.
The humerus is the absolute gold standard here. Through decades of trial and error, marine biologists found that the humerus retains those early growth marks better than almost any other bone in the body. It resists that resorption phenomenon the longest.
Though there is one giant, totally fascinating exception that I caught in the text, the leatherback sea turtle.
Ah, yes. The leatherback is always the outlier in marine biology. It's the absolute giant of the turtle world, and its internal physiology is completely different from the others.
Yeah, the protocol explicitly says, in no uncertain terms, do not use the humerus for a leatherback.
Because their bones remodel so aggressively that the humerus is entirely useless for aging. It is too porous, the history gets wiped out almost immediately. For a leatherback, scientists actually have to look at the eye. Specifically, they use the scleral ossicles.
Which are tiny bones inside the actual eyeball.
Tiny, delicate flat plates of bone found right within the eye tissue. For the leatherback, that is literally the only place where the score is kept accurately.
That is wild, just totally wild. But for the purpose of this deep dive, let's stick to the standard method for the hard-shelled turtles. Your loggerheads, the greens, the Kemp's Ridleys. This brings us to what I've mentally labeled the kitchen phase of the NOAA protocol.
It is surprisingly domestic, isn't it?
It is hilarious. You have this high-level government scientific procedure, and step one involves going to the store and buying a crock pot.
Hey, it is the best tool for the job.
Yeah.
You have to remember, you are starting with a severed flipper from a deceased turtle. You need to get the muscle, the skin, and all that tough connective tissue off without damaging the actual surface of the bone. If you try to use a knife or a scalpel, you risk scratching the outer layer. If you use harsh chemicals right away, you might inadvertently dissolve the newest outer growth rings.
Right, so you cook it.
You slow cook it. The protocol highly recommends a very low simmer.
Yeah, it says about 6 hours for a big bone, maybe 3 hours for a small one. But it warns you, and this was in bold text in the manual, do not boil it.
If you boil it, or honestly, if you just leave it in the slow cooker too long, the intense heat causes the bone to warp and crack. And if the bone cracks, specifically if it cracks across those concentric growth rings, your sample is completely ruined. You have lost the data for good.
So you are literally standing there in a lab, hovering over a slow cooker, checking your turtle soup, just making sure you don't overcook the specimen.
It is a very delicate balance between getting the meat falling off the bone and fundamentally destroying the bone itself.
And once it is finally clean, you scrub it, you rinse it with regular old tap water, and then you put it on the porch.
Sun drying, yeah.
Quote, allow the bones to dry in the sun for approximately 2 weeks. It just feels so wonderfully low-tech.
It does feel low-tech, but the physics behind it really matter. You absolutely need the bone to be completely 100% dehydrated. Because in the next step, we are going to be using high-precision diamond saws. If there is any moisture or residual grease trapped inside the bone matrix, it gums up the diamond blade or causes the cut to wander off center. It needs to be bone dry.
Okay, so 2 weeks pass, the bone is dry. Now we leave the kitchen and enter the workshop phase. We are using a machine called an isomet low-speed precision cutter.
This is a specialized saw with a diamond-embedded blade. And the low-speed part of that name is critical here. High-speed saws create a lot of friction, and friction obviously creates heat. Heat destroys the protein matrix inside the bone. If you spin that saw too fast, you essentially burn up the very rings you are trying to count.
But before they even turn the saw on, there is a whole geometry lesson. The protocol explains that you have to physically identify a specific landmark on the bone called the delta pectoral muscle insertion scar.
Right, that is the rough patch on the bone where the massive chest muscle actually attaches to the flipper. It serves as the standard anchor point for taking measurements.
You draw a pencil line right there, and the guide really emphasizes that this line must be perfectly perpendicular to the long axis of the bone. Why is the angle of the cut so crucial?
Well, imagine you are cutting down a tree stump. If you cut it straight across perfectly horizontally, you get a perfect circle. And the rings you see are their true, actual width. But if you cut it at a steep angle, you get an oval. The rings get physically stretched out along that angle.
And since the scientists use the physical width of the rings to calculate exactly how much the turtle grew during that specific year.
Exactly. If you cut at an angle, the rings suddenly look much wider than they actually are.
Yeah.
You would calculate that the turtle grew massive amounts that year, but it's just a geometric error introduced by the scientist. The data becomes absolute garbage.
Gotcha. So you mount this bone very carefully in a saddle chuck. You lower it onto the diamond blade, which, by the way, is running through a bath of everyday dish soap and water for lubrication, and you slice off a little wafer, a cross-section that is only about 2 or 3 millimeters thick.
But we aren't done yet. If you took that 2-millimeter wafer and put it under a standard microscope, you wouldn't see anything at all. It is solid bone. Light cannot pass through it.
And this is where the story took a real turn for me. We have to decalcify the bone. Essentially, we need to remove all the rock, so we're just left with the rubber.
We need to isolate the protein matrix, the collagen itself, because that is what actually holds the chemical stain we were going to use later on. The solid calcium just blocks the light and gets in the way.
The protocol lists two different ways to do this. There is the gentle, patient way, using a commercial product called Cal-X2. It takes days, sometimes maybe even weeks, depending on the size of the turtle. And then there is the we are in a hurry way, using something called RDO.
RDO is a rapid acid decalcifier. It is basically industrial-strength hydrochloric acid. It works incredibly fast. We are talking hours instead of weeks. But the risk is a process that histologists call maceration.
Which is just a polite scientific word for turning the bone to mush.
Pretty much, yeah. If you leave it in the RDO even a little bit too long, the acid eats through the calcium and starts eating everything else, including the collagen rings you need. You go to pull your carefully cut sample out, and it's just sludge.
But honestly, the mush isn't the part that scared me. It was the warning box right there in the text regarding chemical safety. It says, in no uncertain terms, do not ever mix RDO with formalin.
That is a major day one safety rule in any histology lab. Formalin is the most common chemical preservative used to store biological tissues. And RDO, as we said, is a strong acid. If you mix them, say, you didn't rinse the turtle bone well enough after taking it out of storage before putting it in the acid, they chemically react to form bichloramethyl ether.
And what exactly makes bichloramethyl ether so special?
It is a highly potent carcinogen. It's an alkylating agent. It causes lung cancer very, very effectively, even at extremely low airborne concentrations.
It really highlights that this work isn't just a peaceful endeavor of saving the sea turtles. You are standing in a lab dealing with potentially lethal chemistry just to find out if a turtle is 20 or 25 years old.
Science definitely has a dangerous side. You really have to respect the reagents you're working with.
So, assuming we survived the acid phase and didn't accidentally create a deadly nerve agent, we now have this rubbery, flexible, decalcified disc of bone. How do we actually read it?
Well, we need to make it thin enough for light to pass through it clearly. We need a slice that is about 25 microns thick.
Just for some context for everyone, a standard human hair is about 70 microns thick. So we are taking this floppy piece of bone rubber and slicing it into a film that is barely 1/3 the width of a human hair. How do you even slice something that floppy without just tearing it to shreds?
You have to freeze it. You embed the rubbery bone in a liquid mounting medium, usually something called OCP compound, and you flash freeze it down to -40 degrees Celsius on a specialized machine called a cryostat. Now it is a solid block of ice, basically.
There was a detail here I absolutely loved reading in the protocol. It mentions that right before the microblade passes over to take the slice, the technician might gently rub the top of the frozen block with their bare fingertip.
Ah, the human touch. It's a very practical, old-school trick. You don't want to melt the block, obviously, but you want to warm the very surface just enough microscopically so the blade glides smoothly through the ice rather than shattering it. If the block is too cold and brittle, the section just curls up or cracks into pieces. It is this really nice moment of tactile finesse in an otherwise highly mechanical process.
And finally, the payoff. You take this hair-thin slice of bone, float it in a bit of water to flatten it out, and you stain it.
They use a stain called hematoxylin. This is a deep purple dye. The chemistry behind it is fascinating. The dye naturally binds to the dense lines of arrested growth, much more intensely than it binds to the rest of the rapidly grown bone matrix.
So when you finally slide that under the microscope, the invisible completely becomes visible.
Suddenly you have a map. You see these dark purple rings radiating out from the center, recording every single winter of that turtle's entire life.
And that map tells us not just their age, but their actual life story. You can look at it and say, oh, did they grow really fast in year 5? Did they starve and barely grow in year 10? It is all right there in the spacing.
Precisely. That is the internal biography of the animal.
Now, I want to shift gears completely here. We are going from the internal calendar hidden in the flipper to the external shield. We have this second source, the brand new 2025 study from the Journal of Experimental Biology.
This study takes a totally different, but equally fascinating approach. It looks at the carapace, the shell, not as a biological record, but strictly as an engineering marvel. They analyze the shell as a sandwich structure.
Now, when I hear sandwich, my brain immediately goes to lunch. But in mechanical engineering, that means something very specific, right?
Right. A sandwich composite consists of two stiff, very thin skins on the outside, which engineers call the faces, and a lightweight, much thicker core material in the middle. Cardboard is a classic sandwich structure. Surfboards are sandwich structures.
And turtle shells. You have dense, heavy, compact bone on the top and bottom, and this spongy, highly porous bone, trabecular bone, acting as the core in the middle.
It is an incredibly efficient evolutionary design. It gives the turtle high stiffness and bending strength without the crushing weight of a solid block of bone. If a sea turtle shell were solid bone all the way through, the animal would simply be too heavy to swim efficiently. They'd sink like a stone.
But the researchers in the study did something really interesting. They directly compared sea turtle shells to freshwater and land turtle shells.
And this is where the big surprise is hiding.
Because you would assume, right, that sea turtles have the absolute toughest shells. I mean, they have to deal with tiger sharks, crashing ocean waves, massive boat strikes.
That is exactly the logical assumption anyone would make. But the data shows the complete opposite. Marine turtle shells are significantly less stiff and less strong than their land-dwelling cousins.
They are actually weaker.
The structural engineers use the word compliant. They are far more flexible.
But why would a sea turtle evolve a softer, weaker shell? That just feels like an evolutionary downgrade.
You really have to look at their environment to understand it. A tortoise walking around on land essentially just needs its shell to stop a predator's jaws from closing or to survive a fall off a rock. Absolute rigidity is fantastic for that. But a sea turtle dives deep into the ocean.
Ah, right, the hydrostatic pressure.
Massive hydrostatic pressure. If you have a super rigid, brittle shell like a tortoise does, and you take it down 500 meters or a full kilometer into the abyss, it is highly liable to fail catastrophically. It might literally shatter like glass under the immense crushing load of the water.
But a compliant shell.
A compliant shell can deform. It can actually flex and compress slightly inward under that crushing weight without breaking structurally.
So it is the exact difference between taking a glass bottle and a plastic bottle deep underwater. The glass just shatters into pieces, but the plastic just squeezes in a bit and survives.
Exactly. They functionally traded some blunt impact protection, making them a bit more vulnerable to a shark bite, perhaps to gain the incredible ability to explore the deep vertical water column for food. It is a brilliant functional trade-off.
The study didn't just look at sea turtles as one big monolith, though. They compared the different species to each other. Who actually has the toughest armor out there?
That would be the green sea turtle, Cheloniomydes. The study found that green turtles have the stiffest, strongest, and toughest shells among all the marine species they looked at.
And on the complete other end of the spectrum, who is the squishiest?
The loggerhead, Caretta caretta.
Which is deeply ironic, isn't it? I mean, they are named loggerheads because they have these massive, blocky heads and incredibly powerful, crushing jaws. They're basically the brawlers of the turtle world.
They absolutely are. They crush heavy conch shells and thick crabs just to make a living. And yet, physically, they have the most flexible, compliant shells of the entire group.
The study also touched on this concept of ontogeny, which is just a fancy biological word for growing up.
Right. And as you might expect, the mechanical properties of the shell change significantly with age. A baby sea turtle's shell is quite soft, almost leathery in some species when they first hatch. But as they grow massive over the decades, the bone structure heavily mineralizes and stiffens up. This stiffening trend is really pronounced in the green turtles and the Kemp's Ridleys.
So if we step back for a second and synthesize these two sources, the incredibly intense bone lab protocol and the structural shell mechanics study, what kind of picture are we painting of this animal?
We are looking at a creature that is entirely shaped by time and pressure. The humerus bone quietly records the passage of time, storing the metabolic history of the lean years and the good years in those tiny purple rings, while the shell constantly manages the environmental pressure, sacrificing rigid safety so the animal can access the deep ocean resources it needs to survive.
One records the history, the other enables the lifestyle.
Perfectly said.
But let's bring this all back to the so what. Why do scientists go to these extreme lengths? Why risk the carcinogenic nerve gas and the diamond saws?
It really isn't just academic curiosity. It all comes down to understanding population dynamics. We simply cannot model a species' survival or extinction risk if we don't know exactly how long it takes them to grow up.
Like knowing how old they are when they actually start having babies?
Precisely. If we analyze these bones in the lab and suddenly realize a loggerhead doesn't reach sexual maturity until it is 30 or 35 years old, that changes the conservation math entirely. It means that if you protect a nesting beach today, You won't actually see the results of that protection returning to lay eggs for 3 full decades.
It teaches us that biological recovery is a very, very slow game.
And regarding the shell mechanics, it helps us understand their physical vulnerabilities. If we know their shells are specifically designed to flex rather than resist impact, we can better model what happens when a boat hull strikes them, or when they get entangled in heavy commercial fishing gear. We stop seeing them as these invincible armored tanks and start seeing them as delicate biological machines with very specific structural limits.
Before we wrap up, I have one lingering thought nagging me about the
Oh,
loggerheads.
for it.
So we established they have the weakest, most flexible shells, but they are also widely known for being quite aggressive. They readily interact with sharks. They actively defend themselves.
They're definitely feisty animals, yes.
Is it possible that their aggression is actually a behavioral compensation? Like, if you biologically know your armor is weak, do you have to be the one to throw the first punch to survive?
That is a fantastic hypothesis. Does the aggressive behavior drive the morphology of the shell, or does the morphology drive the behavior? Or perhaps, is there something else about that flexible shell? Maybe it offers far better shock absorption against a blunt strike from a predator
Mm-hmm.
that actually helps them in a fight more than rigid armor would.
Evolution usually has a very specific reason for doing things. We just haven't read that particular chapter of their biography yet.
Not yet. But that is exactly why we keep slicing and cooking the samples. There is always more to find hidden in the bones.
Well, on that note, we will leave you to ponder the complex engineering of the sea turtle next time you are swimming in the ocean. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Keep asking questions.
See you next time.